The 7 levels of acting failure, explained. Level 1. The miscast. The miscast occurs when an actor's established strengths, public image, or genre alignment collide with a role that contradicts everything the audience trusts them to deliver. John Travolta's turn in Battlefield Earth stands as a defining example because the project fused creative misjudgment, financial collapse, and personal overinvestment into a single event. Travolta's long-cultivated charisma and grounded charm were replaced with exaggerated prosthetics, distorted speech, and an alien warlord persona that clashed with every cinematic association audiences had with him.
That is why I am a senior executive, and you are a lowly clerk.
The film's global earnings failed to match its production budget, signaling a catastrophic break in audience confidence. Because Travolta also produced the film and championed its source material, the industry interpreted the outcome as evidence that his creative instincts could not be trusted, creating a barrier around him for future large-scale studio investments. One detail often overlooked is that Travolta originally pitched the film decades earlier, and its eventual release became a passion project that ultimately undermined his professional credibility. George Clooney's placement in this category comes from Batman and Robin, where he inherited a role requiring brooding intensity despite being known for wry humor and laid-back charm. The neon-tinted tone, the exaggerated costume design, and the camp sensibility clashed with his grounded television persona. Clooney publicly accepting fault neutralized long-term damage, but at the time, the film created immediate concern about whether he could anchor a blockbuster. The irony is that Clooney had signed on without reading the full script, revealing an early career willingness to chase franchise prestige before fully assessing material, a decision he later cited as a turning point in his professional discipline. Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor illustrates a modern variant of the miscast, where deviation from established intellectual property canon becomes a direct liability. Eisenberg's nervous, rapid-fire delivery worked against a character traditionally defined by controlled menace.
I was just celebrating God's return out of the ground and back up into the sky.
Because the performance contrasted sharply with expectations anchored in comic book history, he absorbed the backlash personally. Eisenberg later acknowledged that the role disrupted his career momentum, reinforcing the reality that in franchise filmmaking, audience expectation carries greater weight than creative experimentation. Level 2. The typecast. Typecasting becomes a form of failure when the very thing that makes an actor successful becomes the barrier preventing them from evolving. Dwayne Johnson fits this level because his career revolves around a single, carefully protected archetype, the unstoppable, noble, physically imposing hero who rarely shows weakness and almost never loses. This persona guarantees reliable global earnings, but it restricts emotional depth and narrative vulnerability. Johnson himself admitted that he had avoided dramatic roles for years out of fear, which reveals how commercial expectation can trap an actor in a profitable loop. His eventual transformation for The Smashing Machine, where he portrayed Mark Kerr with visible fragility and internal conflict, demonstrated the range he had suppressed to maintain his blockbuster consistency. One detail that underscores his confinement is his contractual tendency to include stipulations controlling how much physical damage his characters can sustain, which keeps his image intact but prevents him from exploring characters with real narrative risk. Michelle Rodriguez's placement in this level comes from her repeated casting as the hardened, streetwise fighter across franchises such as Fast and Furious and Avatar. Hollywood often assigns her roles that emphasize toughness without allowing emotional nuance, reflecting an industry pattern that reduces Latina actresses to a narrow template. Rodriguez herself once remarked that she would have to choose between action tropes and trauma-based prestige roles, highlighting the limited spectrum available to her. A subtle but important detail is that studios frequently pitch her characters as variations of the same fearless rebel, indicating how deeply her brand identity has been industrialized. Jason Statham represents the business-optimized version of typecasting, where the actor fully embraces a fixed persona because it yields predictable global revenue. His consistent portrayal of stoic, hyper-competent enforcers makes his films reliable international performers, especially in markets that prioritize action over dialogue-driven storytelling.
Your life. I was thinking about taking it.
Statham's action style, characterized by practical stunts and minimal emotional exposition, became so defined that studios calibrate project budgets around the expectations of his brand. An interesting aspect of his typecasting is that he performs many of his own stunts, reinforcing a rugged authenticity, but also cementing him further into a physically driven niche he rarely deviates from. Level 3. The overexposed. Overexposure occurs when an actor becomes so omnipresent across films, interviews, talk shows, and advertisements that their cultural value diminishes through saturation. Jennifer Lawrence reached this level when the rapid succession of major releases, award season campaigns, and constant media appearances created a sense of exhaustion around her image. After leading franchises, prestige dramas, and high-profile projects in consecutive years, the audience began to associate her with overabundance rather than anticipation. Lawrence herself recognized this decline, admitting that both she and the public had grown tired of her presence. What makes her case notable is that she stepped away on her own terms for 2 years, recognizing that withdrawing visibility was necessary to restore audience appetite. During her hiatus, she quietly married and focused on personal life, demonstrating how stepping out of the media cycle can be an intentional professional reset rather than a forced retreat. Kevin Hart's placement in this level stems from his ubiquitous presence across movies, streaming comedies, stand-up specials, and a staggering number of commercials.
You think you gonna do this shit to me? You'll be playing basketball in Pelican Bay. King Kong ain't got shit on me.
Hart's relentless work ethic and emphasis on brand consistency made him appear everywhere at once, creating an association between his image and constant promotion rather than unique creative output. His appearance in television ads so frequently that viewers joked about seeing him every other commercial illustrates how overexposure can blur the distinction between performance and advertising. One overlooked aspect of Hart's saturation is that many of his roles share near-identical comedic beats, which amplify the fatigue by offering minimal variation. As a result, his box office draw began to show signs of softening, revealing how overexposure converts familiarity into commercial risk. Chris Pratt exemplifies the modern version of Overexposed, where constant franchise involvement merges with online ideological scrutiny. Starring in major intellectual property series across science fiction, animation, and action placed him in front of audiences repeatedly within a short period. Simultaneously, public debates surrounding his perceived personal beliefs intensified attention beyond his work, accelerating the burnout effect. Pratt remarked that some viewers may dislike him because of his expressions of faith, illustrating how personal identity can become entwined with professional visibility. His situation shows that overexposure in the digital era is not just about appearing too often, but about being discussed too often, which magnifies audience fatigue regardless of performance quality. Level 4. The industry outcast. The industry outcast emerges when an actor challenges entrenched power structures, creating friction with producers, showrunners, or studios who control access to future work. Katherine Heigl entered this level after speaking openly about labor conditions and sexist writing, decisions that collided with Hollywood's long-standing resistance to direct criticism from actresses. When she publicly withdrew her name from Emmy consideration for Grey's Anatomy, arguing that the material did not merit the nomination, the industry reframed her stance as ingratitude rather than critique. Her complaints about grueling 17-hour workdays were similarly recast as unprofessional behavior. This rebranding into the difficult label became a tool for silencing her, particularly because she voiced concerns before the broader cultural shifts that later validated similar critiques. A detail that illustrates the severity of her sidelining is that producers began removing her from promotional materials even before her exit, signaling a deliberate effort to reduce her professional visibility. Shia LaBeouf occupies this category due to instability that made him unpredictable on set. His confrontations with directors, volatile interactions with co-stars, and public displays of erratic behavior created an environment where studios questioned whether he could be safely insured or reliably directed. A notable example was his physical clash with actor Tom Hardy during Lawless, an incident significant enough that crew members had to separate them. While LaBeouf later sought treatment and voluntarily stepped away from major productions, the industry's response was to place his representation on hold rather than fully severing ties. This demonstrates how outcast status differs from full blacklisting. The door remains technically open, but the actor must rebuild trust from a position of limited opportunity. Monique demonstrates a distinct path into this level, rooted in her refusal to perform unpaid promotional labor after Precious and her insistence on equitable compensation. Her stance brought her into conflict with influential figures such as Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry, whose disapproval carries enormous weight in the industry. Monique reported that after declining to travel for uncompensated press events, she was rapidly branded as hard to work with, creating a barrier that blocked opportunities despite her Academy Award win. What makes her case particularly striking is that her public disputes revealed how an actor can be punished simply for rejecting industry norms that require unpaid labor disguised as goodwill. Her situation shows that challenging financial inequity, even when justified, can trigger systemic retaliation that functions as a silent form of exile. Level 5. The public meltdown. The public meltdown category applies when an actor's personal crises become so visible and so frequent that their work is eclipsed entirely by ongoing instability. Lindsay Lohan represents this level because her string of legal issues, addiction struggles, and court-mandated rehab stays transformed her from a bankable lead into a production risk. Beginning in the late 2000s, the constant cycle of arrests, probation violations, and tabloid exposure eroded the confidence that studios require before insuring a performer. A single delayed shoot can cost a production hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Lohan's unpredictability made scheduling nearly impossible. One detail that underscores the depth of her collapse is that 2015 marked the first year in more than 8 years when she was no longer on probation, revealing how extensively legal entanglements consumed her professional life. During this period, her acclaimed early roles became overshadowed by the narrative of a star caught in perpetual crisis. Charlie Sheen's Meltdown was defined by direct confrontation with his employers, creating an immediate rupture in a top-earning television property. His public tirades in 2011, including live-streamed outbursts and hostile attacks against the producers of 2.5 Men, dissolved any possibility of a functional working relationship. Warner Brothers ultimately fired him, effective immediately, citing dangerously self-destructive behavior that constituted legal grounds for termination. Sheen's collapse is distinct in that it involved a measurable financial fallout. Analysts estimated that losing his stake in syndication could cost him up to hundreds of millions of dollars. A telling detail is that Sheen's catchphrases from this period, such as,
I got tiger blood, man,
briefly became cultural memes, demonstrating how a meltdown can shift from tragedy to spectacle in real time. Amanda Bynes represents a version of this level shaped by mental health crises rather than hostility or addiction alone. After rising from child star status to successful film comedies, she entered a prolonged period of instability involving substance use, erratic public behavior, and multiple psychiatric holds. Her conservatorship, which lasted from 2013 to 2022, reflected the extent to which the legal system, rather than the industry, assumed control over her affairs. One detail that highlights the systemic failure surrounding her is that studios quietly withdrew opportunities rather than offering support, effectively disappearing her from mainstream projects long before audiences understood the severity of her condition. Her trajectory illustrates how Hollywood often treats vulnerable performers as liabilities rather than individuals requiring long-term care. Level 6. The Blacklist. The Blacklist represents the most severe form of professional collapse, where an actor becomes an immediate liability due to accusations or behavior that studios cannot afford to be publicly associated with. Mel Gibson entered this level after his arrest in 2006, during which he delivered an anti-Semitic rant that instantly transformed him from a bankable star into a reputational hazard. The severity of the fallout was not only tied to the remarks themselves but to the fact that they occurred while he was already navigating earlier controversies. Studios treated him as a toxic asset, quietly removing him from major productions for nearly a decade. A detail that highlights the breadth of his ostracism is that his return into mainstream visibility came not through acting but through directing, specifically with Hacksaw Ridge, demonstrating that the industry required exceptional artistic success before reconsidering his public value. His path shows that at this level, redemption hinges on extraordinary output rather than forgiveness. Kevin Spacey's collapse was immediate and absolute after multiple allegations of sexual misconduct emerged in 2017, triggering a rapid institutional purge. Netflix terminated its relationship with him, removed him from House of Cards, and halted all projects involving him. The film All the Money in the World reshot his completed scenes with another actor, an unprecedented financial and logistical undertaking that demonstrated the lengths studios would go to distance themselves from him. Even though Spacey later won several legal battles, the industry did not reverse its stance, illustrating that moral toxicity, once publicly established, carries more weight than courtroom outcomes. One notable aspect is that Spacey attempted to address the controversy through a video delivered in character as Frank Underwood.
I told you my deepest, darkest secrets. I showed you exactly what people are capable of,
which further damaged public perception by blending fiction with real allegations. Armie Hammer's placement in this level derives from the swift collapse triggered by leaked messages involving violent fantasies and allegations of non-consensual behavior. Within weeks, his agency dropped him, his publicist resigned, and multiple projects recast his roles. The speed of his erasure reflects modern digital dynamics, where public relations risk escalates faster than factual adjudication. A critical detail is that internal agency committees evaluated the reputational threat and acted preemptively, even before formal investigations concluded, demonstrating how corporate self-protection now drives decisions at this level. Hammer's case shows that in the current media environment, allegations alone, when graphic and widely circulated, can dismantle an entire professional infrastructure almost instantly. Level 7. The Forgotten. The forgotten category describes actors who fade not because of scandal or public collapse, but because industry structures, genre shifts, or targeted suppression quietly remove them from opportunities. Brendan Fraser embodies this level due to the intersection of physical injury, emotional trauma, and institutional neglect. Years of stunt-heavy work during the Mummy era resulted in multiple surgeries on his back, knees, and vocal cords, leaving him physically depleted at the same time the industry's appetite for action-adventure shifted. Fraser later revealed that he felt professionally sidelined after alleging inappropriate conduct by a prominent Hollywood Foreign Press Association figure, which added a layer of political isolation to his disappearance. One revealing detail is that he spent years taking small, overlooked roles in international or low-budget projects before director Darren Aronofsky rediscovered him, indicating how far removed he had become from mainstream casting circles despite having once been a major box office draw. Mira Sorvino represents a more structurally imposed version of this level, where targeted suppression by powerful individuals resulted in long-term disappearance. After winning an Academy Award for Mighty Aphrodite, she should have entered a period of increased opportunity. Instead, directors later confirmed that Harvey Weinstein had instructed studios to avoid hiring her, spreading the narrative that she was difficult to work with. This quiet, administrative blockade restricted her access to major roles without public explanation, allowing the industry to erase her while maintaining plausible deniability. A detail that underscores the depth of her removal is that she only learned the full extent of the interference decades later, when filmmaker Peter Jackson publicly confirmed that her name had been placed on an internal list of actresses to avoid. Her trajectory shows how Level 7 failure often stems from hidden forces rather than audience rejection. Meg Ryan illustrates a version of this level shaped by market evolution and demographic bias. As the leading figure of 1990s romantic comedies, her films defined an entire genre. However, when the romantic comedy declined in the early 2000s and Hollywood's ageism restricted roles for women over 40, she lost the commercial environment that had sustained her. The audience still recognized her name, but the industry no longer produced the types of films she excelled in, creating a structural mismatch between her skill set and the available opportunities. A telling detail is that Ryan shifted into directing and producing, not out of disinterest in acting, but because viable roles had nearly vanished. Her disappearance reflects how career erosion can occur gradually and silently when genre trends move on and the system offers no transitional pathway. If this deep dive kept you hooked, the one on your screen is going to blow your mind, so check it out next.